The freeze at the airport. The loudspeaker echoed across the crowded terminal, calling flights in many languages, while the smell of coffee and the soft sound of rolling suitcases filled the air. Sundar Pichai stood at the immigration line, his hands in his pockets, his mind strangely calm. He had spent years moving through airports from one city to another, his schedule a blur of meetings, speeches, and interviews. But on this day, something was different. The air felt heavier, his heart beat in a way he had not felt in years. He thought it was just the fatigue of travel, until his eyes caught a face he never expected to see again. There she was, his ex-wife, her hair tied back the same way she always used to do when she was in a hurry, her walk graceful yet rushed. She held 2 small suitcases, one in each hand, and beside her, 2 children ran in circles, laughing and tugging at her coat. Sundar's breath stopped in his chest. He froze. It was not the sight of her that paralyzed him, though that was shocking enough. It was the children. 2 small twins, about 7 years old, with dark hair, wide eyes, and smiles so familiar that Sundar felt as if he were staring into a mirror from his own childhood. The noise of the airport faded into silence for him. The world shrank until only that scene remained. Her looking around nervously, the twins pulling at her hands, and the unshakable truth burning in his heart that those children looked exactly like him. His knees weakened, and for a moment he thought he might collapse. He had prepared himself for many things in life, but not this. Not the sudden return of a woman he once loved deeply, nor the shock of seeing 2 young faces that stirred something he could not yet name. Memories rushed through him like a storm. He remembered the early days of their marriage when money was scarce and dreams seemed too far away. They had sat on the floor of their tiny apartment, eating simple meals, laughing at nothing, and promising each other a future filled with hope. He remembered her patience, her quiet strength, the way she encouraged him when he doubted himself. But he also remembered the arguments, the distance that grew with time, the nights he came home too late, too tired, too consumed by ambition. They had parted with words left unsaid, both wounded, both stubborn, each believing the other no longer cared enough to fight for what they had built. And now here she was, years later, with 2 children who bore his face. Sundar's mind screamed for answers. Could it be? Were they his? Why had she never told him? Why now, in this crowded airport of all places, had fate placed her before him? He wanted to call out her name, to demand the truth, to embrace those children who might be his blood, but something inside him held back. Respect. Humility. He had built his life on those values, and even in this storm, they anchored him. He could not just run forward and shatter her world with questions. He had to breathe. He had to wait. But his heart ached with the weight of silence. As he stood frozen, his thoughts spiraled into darker places. What if they were not his children? What if fate was only playing a cruel trick, making strangers look like him to stir his regrets? Or worse, what if they were his and he had missed years of their lives, their first words, their first steps, their birthdays, their laughter, and their tears? The thought crushed him, making his chest tighten. He had worked so hard to create a life of success, to build a reputation for humility and kindness. And yet, had he failed in the one place that mattered most? His family? Suddenly, one of the twins turned, his eyes meeting Sundar's. The boy's expression froze in curiosity. He tugged at his mother's sleeve and whispered something. She turned too, her eyes locking with Sundar's across the crowd. The moment stretched like eternity. Her lips parted slightly, her face pale as if she too had seen a ghost. The noise of the airport returned, but to Sundar it all sounded distant, muffled like waves crashing far away. He could not move. She could not look away. The boy's hand clutched hers tightly. The girl pressed closer to her side, and in their innocent faces, Sundar saw a truth he could not yet touch but could no longer deny. The line moved forward. People brushed past him, but he stood rooted, his body heavy as stone. In that silence he felt every choice he had made, every moment of pride, every sacrifice, every regret, and he knew that whatever came next would not only test his strength, but also redefine the man he thought he had become. His heart raced with fear and longing, with questions too sharp to swallow. Then the loudspeaker called the boarding for his flight. His name echoed in his mind, his responsibilities waiting on the other side of that gate. But his past, his ex-wife, and those twins who looked just like him stood only a few steps away. Torn between duty and the deepest pull of his heart, Sundar realized he could no longer escape. Not this time. Not anymore. And then, as if fate itself demanded suspense, she took a step toward him. The unspoken storm, she stood still for a moment, her eyes wide, her lips pressed tightly together, as if words had formed in her throat but she could not release them. Sundar felt the weight of that silence pressing into his chest. She had stepped toward him but then paused, her hand tightening around the wrist of the little girl beside her. The child looked up at her with questioning eyes, innocent and unaware of the heavy tide about to pull everyone into its current. Sundar could see the hesitation in her face, the conflict written in every line, and it mirrored his own. He wanted to run to her, to hold her, to demand answers, yet every instinct told him this was not a moment to rush. Years of restraint, years of learning humility and patience chained him in place even as his heart begged him to break free. The boy, braver than his sister, tugged forward and pointed at Sundar openly. His voice rang out in the busy airport, clear enough for Sundar to hear. "Mama, he looks like me." The words sliced through the noise of rolling suitcases, through the chatter of strangers, and sank deep into Sundar's bones. The mother bent quickly, pressing a hand over the boy's shoulder, whispering something urgent into his ear, but her trembling hands betrayed her. Sundar's throat burned with the effort to stay composed. It was not just a child's innocent remark. It was truth. It was confirmation that the resemblance was not only in his imagination. The children themselves felt it too. Sundar took a step forward, one step heavy but sure. He told himself he would not allow fear to paralyze him again. He had been afraid once, years ago, afraid to open his heart fully, afraid to pause his climb for success long enough to protect the fragile bond of love. That fear had cost him his marriage and perhaps much more. But now, standing in this moment, he knew that retreating would haunt him forever. He could not let her walk away again without speaking, without knowing, without confronting the storm that had waited all these years. Their eyes locked again. She whispered his name, so faint he almost thought he had imagined it. He had not heard his name spoken like that in years. Soft, tender, with a mixture of love and sorrow, as though every memory they had ever shared had been condensed into a single breath. Sundar's chest tightened. He wanted to speak, but words refused to come. Around them, the line moved. The airport lived on. Strangers brushed past, and yet it felt as if the entire world had paused, watching this fragile reunion unfold. Finally, she spoke louder, her voice low but steady, shaped by years of holding secrets too heavy to carry. "You should not be here." The words struck Sundar harder than any accusation could. Not anger, not welcome, but a quiet warning. It was enough to shatter him and pull him deeper into the confusion. Why should he not be here? Why, after so many years apart, was her first response? Not explanation, not relief, not even confrontation, but warning. His heart beat faster. What truth had she hidden from him all these years? The girl clung to her mother's hand, her wide eyes fixed on Sundar. He forced a small smile at her, trying to hide the storm raging inside him, but she only stared back, curious yet shy. Sundar wanted to kneel, to ask her name, to hear her voice, to feel the confirmation in his heart. But his ex-wife shifted quickly, pulling both children closer, shielding them, her body forming a barrier. She had always been protective, but this time the intensity in her eyes was sharper, almost desperate. Sundar recognized it. It was fear, not fear of him, but fear of what his presence could unravel. His flight was now boarding. The announcement echoed again, reminding him of the world waiting for him beyond this terminal, of obligations that had built his life, of responsibilities that countless people expected him to fulfill. But at this moment, none of that seemed real. What was real was the woman who had once shared his dreams, the two children who mirrored his own face, and the unspoken truth standing between them. Sundar realized he had reached a crossroads. He could walk away again, bury his questions in silence and continue his life as if nothing had happened. Or he could step forward, open the locked door of the past, and face whatever waited on the other side. He drew in a deep breath, his voice finally finding its way through his tightened throat. "Are they mine?" The question trembled in the air, simple yet carrying the weight of years, the pain of distance and the desperate hunger for truth. Her eyes filled with tears immediately, though she turned her face away so the children would not see. Sundar's heart cracked. The silence that followed was not rejection, but neither was it confirmation. It was heavier than both. It was the silence of someone torn between protecting the past and confronting the present. It was the silence of someone who knew the truth but feared what it would unleash. Before she could respond, the boy suddenly slipped from her grasp and walked toward Sundar. His steps were small, curious, innocent. He stopped only a few feet away, tilting his head with a smile that made Sundar's heart ache. "You look like me," the boy repeated louder this time. Sundar knelt down, his hands shaking, his eyes locked with the boy's. He wanted to speak, to say something kind, something that would not break the fragile moment, but his throat tightened with emotion. The boy's eyes sparkled, unburdened by secrets, unchained by fear, as if the truth to him was simple. This man before him belonged. The mother rushed forward, pulling the boy back to her side, her face pale and trembling. She looked at Sundar, her voice trembling now, breaking under the weight of her emotions. "Not here. Not like this." Her words carried urgency, a plea, almost a cry. Sundar rose slowly, his body heavy, his heart demanding answers he could not force from her lips. The crowd moved around them, life continuing as if nothing extraordinary was happening. Yet Sundar knew that his life had already changed forever. He had seen enough to know the truth could no longer stay buried. As she turned quickly, guiding the children away toward another gate, Sundar reached out, his hand trembling in the air, not touching her but begging silently for her not to disappear. She paused only for a moment, her back to him, her head lowered, and then, without turning around, she whispered words that froze him deeper than before. "You were never supposed to know." His breath caught, his body went still, and the world around him blurred. The boarding announcement called his name again, but Sundar no longer heard it. Her words echoed in his mind like thunder, louder than anything else in the terminal. Never supposed to know? What did it mean? Why had she hidden this from him, and what would it cost to finally uncover the truth? Shadows of truth. Sundar stood frozen in the middle of the terminal, his boarding call echoing like a distant reminder of a world that no longer mattered. Her words replayed in his mind, sharp and haunting. "You were never supposed to know." He felt as if the ground beneath him had shifted, as if every certainty he had built his life on was cracking under invisible weight. People brushed past him, annoyed that he was blocking the way, but he barely noticed. His eyes stayed fixed on the direction she had gone, his heart torn between following and staying rooted in the storm of disbelief. His mind flooded with memories, not of success or achievements, but of quiet, forgotten nights. He remembered their last conversation before she left, the way her eyes had been filled with something unsaid. He remembered the silence in the room, broken only by the sound of her packing, the tremor in her hands as she folded clothes without looking at him. He had convinced himself at the time that she no longer loved him, that their bond had simply dissolved under the weight of his ambition. But now he wondered if the truth had been hidden even then, if her departure had been less about losing love and more about guarding a secret too large to reveal. His chest tightened as the possibilities unraveled. If the twins were his children, then she had carried that truth alone for 7 years. 7 birthdays, 7 winters, 7 summers, all those years where he had been away giving speeches, leading projects, signing deals. She had been somewhere else, raising children who might be his own flesh and blood. The thought pierced him with guilt so deep he felt it in his bones. He had prided himself on resilience, on perseverance, on kindness toward others. But what did any of that mean if he had failed the ones who needed him most? Yet doubt slithered through him like a shadow. What if they were not his? What if this was nothing more than coincidence, a cruel resemblance that fate had thrown in his path? His ex-wife's words suggested more than coincidence, but she had not confirmed anything. Her fear, her urgency, her choice to hide, it all hinted at a truth too complicated to be simple. Sundar wrestled with it in silence, his body trembling with the pull of both hope and despair. He finally moved, his steps heavy, dragging him toward the gate she had disappeared into. But when he arrived, the waiting area was empty. The flight had closed its doors, the passengers already boarding, and she was gone. Sundar stood at the glass, staring out at the plane that was preparing to leave, a hollow ache growing inside him. He could have chased her, demanded she stop, demanded she answer. But that would have meant chaos, a scene in front of strangers, and he could not bring himself to strip her of dignity in that way. He had always respected her strength, even in anger. Now that respect kept him frozen yet again. He sat down heavily in one of the chairs, his fingers digging into his knees, his mind running in circles. What was he supposed to do now? Go on with his life as if this moment had not happened? Return to his meetings, his deadlines, his speeches, carrying the unbearable question inside him? No, he knew he could not. The truth was no longer a possibility to ignore. It was a force that demanded to be faced, even if it meant unraveling everything he thought he had secured. As he stared blankly at the crowd moving around him, Sundar remembered the boy's words again. "You look like me." Children had no reason to lie. Their eyes carried honesty that adults lost along the way. In that innocent remark, Sundar heard the confirmation his ex-wife would not give. Yet he also knew that confirmation alone was not enough. He needed more than hope. He needed truth. His phone vibrated in his pocket. He pulled it out without thinking. It was a message from his assistant, reminding him of the board meeting waiting for him once he landed. For the first time in his career, Sundar looked at the reminder and felt nothing but emptiness. The meeting could wait. The company could wait. The world could wait. He had found something he could not replace, something no success could cover. He typed quickly, canceling his commitments, his hands trembling as he pressed send. Then for a long moment, he simply stared at his reflection in the glass wall, the busy airport behind him. His own eyes looked back, weary, searching, burdened with questions. And behind that reflection in his memory were the faces of the twins, their curious gazes holding him captive. Sundar made a decision. He would not let this moment slip into silence. He would find her. He would follow every thread, every clue until he reached the truth. Respect and humility would guide him, but resilience would drive him. He had built his life on perseverance, and now he would use that strength for something greater than career or recognition. He would use it to uncover what had been hidden, no matter the cost. Yet as he rose, determination replacing hesitation, he could not escape the echo of her last words. "You were never supposed to know." They rang in his ears like a riddle, a warning, a wound. What danger lay beneath that secret? What reason could be so powerful that she had carried it in silence all these years? Sundar felt a shiver run through him. Truth was never simple, and he feared this one might break more than it healed. He picked up his bag, his steps steady now, and walked toward the exit. Somewhere in this city, she was with the twins, guarding the truth he was no longer willing to let stay hidden. He did not know where the path would lead, but he knew this was only the beginning of a journey that would test him in ways no stage or boardroom ever could. And then, just as he reached the glass doors leading out, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was not his assistant. It was an unknown number. The message read only 3 words: "Leave them alone." The warning Sundar stared at the screen of his phone, the 3 words burning into his mind like fire. Leave them alone. His fingers tightened around the device until his knuckles turned pale. He had expected confusion, maybe denial, perhaps even anger from his ex-wife, but not this. This was different. This was deliberate. Someone had taken the time to send a message designed to stop him before he had even begun. The words were not hers, he could sense it. Her fear had been raw, personal, but this message carried the sharp edge of command. His thoughts spun wildly. Who knew? Who else was involved in this secret? Was it a family member? A new partner in her life? Or was it something darker? Something far more complicated than he dared to imagine? Sundar felt a strange mixture of fear and resolve stirring within him. The warning was meant to intimidate, to scare him into silence, but instead it fueled his determination. If there was one thing he had learned in all his years of struggle and success, it was this. Whenever someone told him he could not do something, it was exactly the thing he had to do. He left the airport and stepped into the cool night air, the city alive with horns and hurried footsteps. Neon lights reflected on the wet pavement, and Sundar walked aimlessly for a while, trying to calm the storm inside him. Yet every streetlight seemed to throw shadows that whispered of secrets. Every stranger's glance felt like suspicion. He replayed the scene at the terminal again and again, each detail carving itself deeper into his heart. The twins' faces, the way the boy's eyes sparkled, the way the girl clung to her mother, and most of all, the trembling in his ex-wife's voice when she whispered that he was never supposed to know. Sundar checked into a quiet hotel, but sleep refused to come. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the phone resting on the table beside him, as if the screen might light up again at any moment with more warnings. He thought of the children. Were they safe? Were they happy? Had they grown up thinking someone else was their father? Or had she raised them in silence, never speaking of him, erasing him from their story? The pain of not knowing was unbearable. By morning, he decided he needed answers. The first step was finding her. He remembered her habits, her small preferences that few others would notice. She liked bookstores more than shopping malls. She favored quiet neighborhoods over crowded streets. She had always loved the smell of jasmine in the evenings, walking with flowers in her hair. Sundar wandered through the city, searching not only with his eyes but with his memory. He stopped by old places they had once visited together, his heart tightening with every corner turned. It was in a quiet cafe, tucked between tall apartment buildings, that he finally saw her again. She was seated near the window, the twins beside her, their laughter filling the small space. Sundar froze outside, watching through the glass. The sight pierced him. She looked tired, her face lined with years of holding burdens. But there was also warmth in her eyes as she leaned down to wipe crumbs from the children's lips. Sundar felt both awe and sorrow. He had missed so much. He stepped inside, his heart pounding, the bell above the door announcing his arrival. Her laughter died instantly. She looked up and their eyes locked once more. The children turned, curious, their young faces lighting up when they recognized him from the airport. Sundar raised his hand slowly, almost in greeting, but her expression hardened, fear flashing across her features. Before he could say anything, her phone vibrated on the table. She glanced at the screen and Sundar caught a glimpse of a name. Unfamiliar, sharp, intimidating. Her face paled. She grabbed the phone, silenced it quickly, and slid it back into her bag. Sundar noticed her hands trembling. This was no ordinary life she was living. There was something else, something pressing down on her that went beyond old wounds or broken love. He took a careful step closer, lowering his voice so the children would not hear. "We need to talk, please. I don't want to fight. I don't want to make things harder for you. I just want to understand." His words carried the humility that had defined his journey, a softness that came from years of listening more than speaking. She looked at him, her eyes filling with conflict, torn between trust and fear. Finally, she whispered back, "If you care for them, if you truly care, then walk away now. Do not look for us again. It's not safe." The words struck Sundar harder than any accusation ever had. Not safe. The phrase echoed through him. What danger surrounded her? What threat hovered over the children? Before he could ask, the boy spoke up innocently. "Mama, can he sit with us?" The child's voice broke the tension, pure and unaware of the storm raging between the adults. Sundar's chest tightened with longing. But his ex-wife shook her head quickly, her hand tightening on the boy's shoulder. "Finish your food," she said softly, her voice trembling. Sundar sat down at a nearby table, his eyes never leaving them. He knew now that this was no simple matter of lost love. This was deeper, darker, something that had forced her to carry secrets alone for years. As she hurriedly paid the bill and gathered the children, Sundar felt the weight of a new truth pressing in. He was no longer just chasing answers about fatherhood. He was stepping into a hidden battle he did not yet understand. They left the cafe quickly, disappearing into the busy street. Sundar rose to follow, but as he reached the door, his phone buzzed again. Another unknown message appeared on the screen, short and chilling. "Last warning. Next time, they pay the price." Sundar's breath caught, his eyes scanning the crowd outside, his heart thundering with fear and rage. Whoever was behind this knew his every move. And now it was not just his heart at stake, it was the safety of the twins. The chase in silence, Sundar stood at the cafe doorway, the phone trembling in his hand, the words of the message sinking into him like ice. Last warning. Next time, they pay the price. He felt the ground tilt beneath him. It was no longer about secrets or hidden truths. It was about danger. Real danger. Whoever was behind those words knew about the twins, and worse, they were willing to use them as leverage. Sundar had faced countless challenges in his career, but nothing compared to the fear of losing children he might never have a chance to fully know. He stepped out into the street, his eyes scanning the crowd. The city's noise felt louder than ever, every car horn and shout scraping at his nerves. He caught a glimpse of his ex-wife turning into a narrow alley, the twins at her side. She was moving quickly, almost running. Sundar followed at a distance, careful not to alarm her, his heart pounding in his chest. He wanted to call out, but the memory of her trembling voice echoed in him. "It's not safe." He realized now she was not exaggerating. Someone was watching. Someone was controlling her life. The alley twisted into a quieter neighborhood where the noise of traffic faded into the sound of barking dogs and creaking bicycles. Sundar slowed his pace, staying in the shadows, observing. She finally stopped in front of an old apartment building with cracked paint and broken balconies. She looked over her shoulder once, her eyes sharp, scanning the street. Sundar pressed himself against the wall, hiding, his breath shallow. She ushered the twins inside quickly, and the heavy door closed behind them. Sundar waited, torn between walking up the steps and knocking, or leaving her the space she so desperately wanted. His mind spun with questions. Who had sent those messages? Why were they so desperate to keep him away? What threat hung over her life that forced her to hide even from him? The more he thought, the clearer it became. The warning was not just about protecting her secret, but about controlling her. And now, by appearing again, He had disrupted that fragile balance. That night, Sundar returned to his hotel, restless and consumed. He sat at the desk with a notepad in front of him, something he had not used in years. He wrote down everything he remembered. Her reaction at the airport, the boy's words, the unknown messages, the name on her phone at the cafe. He pieced them together like fragments of a puzzle, but the picture remained incomplete. The only thing he knew for certain was that her fear was real, and the twins were caught in the middle of it. He thought of reaching out to old friends, to people who could help him investigate quietly, but part of him resisted. This was personal. It was not about power or influence. It was about family, about truth, about love buried under years of silence. He wanted to face it not as a man of status, but as a father searching for his children. Still, he knew he could not do it alone. The threat was bigger than his determination. The next morning, he returned to the neighborhood. He sat in a small tea stall across the street from the apartment, blending with the locals, pretending to read a newspaper. Hours passed, but patience had always been his strength. He waited, watching, hoping for a glimpse. Finally, the door opened. His ex-wife stepped out alone this time. Her shoulders were tense, her eyes scanning the street as if expecting danger at every corner. Sundar felt the urge to run to her, but he stayed put, observing. A black car pulled up slowly beside her. The window rolled down and a man inside spoke. Sundar could not hear the words, but he saw the fear flash across her face. She shook her head, whispered something quickly, and the man leaned closer, his expression hard. Then she nodded reluctantly, her hands trembling. The car drove away, leaving her pale and shaken. Sundar's fists clenched. Whoever these people were, they held power over her. She turned back toward the apartment, and for the briefest moment, her eyes met Sundar's across the street. Surprise flickered, then pain, then something else, pleading. She shook her head slowly, almost imperceptibly, as if begging him not to interfere. Then she disappeared inside again. Sundar sat frozen, torn between respect for her plea and the roaring fire inside him that demanded action. That night, as he lay awake again, he could not shake the image of the black car, of the fear in her face. He realized he was already part of this story, whether she wanted him there or not. Walking away would not protect them. It would only give more power to whoever was holding her hostage in silence. The following day, Sundar returned once more, this time determined to follow the car if it came back. He waited, hours passing like heavy stones, and just as the evening light faded, the black car returned. It parked outside the building, and the same man stepped out, tall, dressed in dark clothes, his movements precise and deliberate. He entered the apartment without hesitation, as if he owned it. Sundar's breath caught. Minutes later, the sound of raised voices floated out through the open window. He could not hear the words, but he recognized her voice, strained and desperate, and the man's deeper tone, commanding and cold. The twins began to cry faintly in the background. Sundar's chest tightened with rage and helplessness. He stood halfway across the street, his body trembling with the instinct to rush inside to protect them. And then suddenly, the apartment window slammed shut. Silence fell. The black car's engine started again, and the man walked out calmly, his face unreadable. He climbed back into the car, and it drove away into the night, leaving behind an apartment wrapped in silence. Sundar clenched his fists, his decision solidifying inside him. He could no longer wait, no longer watch from the shadows. Tomorrow he would go inside. Tomorrow he would demand the truth face to face, no matter what danger it brought. But as he turned back toward his hotel, his phone buzzed again. This time the message was longer. You have one chance. Leave tonight, return to your world, and never speak of them again. If you stay, we will take what you love most. Sundar stopped in his tracks, his blood running cold. What he loved most, they knew. They already knew. This was not just about his ex-wife and the twins. It was about him. And the threat was closer than he had ever imagined. The reckoning, the night felt heavier than any he had known. Sundar sat at the small desk in his hotel room, the message still glowing on his phone, its words cutting into him like sharp glass. If you stay, we will take what you love most. He stared at it for a long time, his heart aching with the weight of choice. He could leave now, return to the life he had built, bury this painful discovery and protect himself, or he could stay, risk everything, and fight for a truth that had already changed him forever. His mind traveled back to the twins' faces, to the boy's innocent remark, "You look like me," and to the girl's shy but curious eyes. He remembered the way his ex-wife's voice cracked with fear, the trembling in her hands, the quiet plea for him to walk away. But he also remembered the resilience that had guided his journey, the countless obstacles he had overcome with patience, humility, and unshakable determination. And in that moment he understood. Walking away would mean abandoning the very values that had defined him. Resilience was not only for success in the world, it was for moments like this when fear tried to silence love. The next morning, Sundar walked to the apartment building. His steps were steady, his heart resolute. He no longer came as a silent observer, but as a man ready to face the storm. He knocked on the heavy wooden door, the sound echoing through the hallway. Silence answered at first, but then the door creaked open. His ex-wife stood there, her face pale, her eyes wide with both dread and relief. "You should not have come," she whispered, her voice breaking. Sundar shook his head gently. "I could not leave. Not without knowing, not without seeing them, not without understanding." His voice was calm, soft, yet filled with a determination she could not ignore. She stepped aside reluctantly, and he entered the small apartment. The twins were sitting on the floor, drawing with crayons, their laughter soft, fragile. They looked up when Sundar entered, and the boy smiled instantly, while the girl tilted her head, studying him with cautious curiosity. Sundar felt his chest tighten with love and grief all at once. He knelt down, watching them quietly, letting his presence speak where words could not. His ex-wife closed the door, her hands trembling as she locked it. She turned to him, her eyes glistening. "Yes," she whispered finally, her voice shaking. "They are yours." The truth landed not with shock, but with a quiet, crushing relief. Sundar closed his eyes, his breath shuddering, his heart breaking open with the confirmation he had longed for. But the moment of peace was short. Heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway. A knock, sharp and commanding, rattled the door. His ex-wife's face drained of color. "They're here," she whispered, panic flashing in her eyes. Sundar stood, his body tense, his heart racing. The twins froze, their drawings forgotten. The knock came again, louder this time. Then a voice, cold and deep, seeped through the door. "We warned you." Sundar looked at her, then at the children, and something inside him shifted. All the boardrooms, all the conferences, all the speeches meant nothing compared to this moment. Here, in this small apartment, was the true test of his life. He took a deep breath, his voice calm but firm. "Open the door. I will speak to them." She shook her head desperately, but Sundar stepped forward. "Trust me," he whispered. The door opened, and the tall man in dark clothes entered, his eyes sharp, his presence heavy with threat. Two others stood behind him. The room filled with silence, broken only by the faint sound of the twins' breathing. The man's gaze locked on Sundar. "You should have left. Now it will cost you." Sundar did not flinch. He met the man's eyes, his voice steady. "I don't know who you are or what you believe you control, but I know this. These children are innocent, and no threat will ever change the truth of who they are. I will not walk away. If you want to hurt someone, hurt me, but leave them out of it." The man's expression darkened, his hand twitching as if weighing his options. The tension was unbearable, the air thick with the possibility of violence. Yet Sundar stood unmoving, his calmness disarming in the face of aggression. The twins clung to their mother, wide-eyed, their small voices trembling. "Mama," the girl whispered, "we're scared." And then something shifted. The man studied Sundar's face for a long moment, his eyes narrowing. Perhaps it was the unwavering calm, the humility that refused to bend, the quiet strength that did not need to shout. Whatever it was, the man finally smirked, cold and bitter. "You're stronger than I thought. But strength doesn't matter here. Remember this, we decide what happens. Walk away or they will never be safe." He turned sharply and left, his footsteps fading into the hallway, the black car soon roaring away into the distance. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Sundar exhaled slowly, his body trembling only after the danger had passed. His ex-wife collapsed into a chair, tears spilling freely now. "I wanted to protect you," she whispered. "I wanted to protect them. That's why I left. That's why I hid the truth. You were never supposed to be dragged into this." Sundar knelt beside her, his voice gentle. "I cannot undo the past, but I can choose now. I will not leave you alone in this. Whatever danger there is, we will face it together." His words carried no promise of victory, only the steady faith of resilience and kindness. The twins climbed into his lap, their small hands resting on his arms as if they had known him all along. Sundar felt his heart swell, not with triumph but with a sense of wholeness he had never known. In their laughter, in their tears, In their innocent trust, he found the strength he had always searched for. Outside, the city continued its restless rhythm, but inside that small apartment a new story had begun. Not of fear, but of courage, not of secrecy, but of truth. Sundar knew the road ahead would not be easy. There were still shadows to confront, dangers to resist, and wounds to heal. But for the first time in years, he felt complete. He was not just a leader, not just a man of success. He was a father. And nothing, no threat, no warning, no shadow could take that away. The night grew quiet, but the weight of the journey ahead lingered. Sundar held the twins close, his eyes closing as he whispered to himself, a vow that carried the force of his entire being. I will never walk away again.